11 minutes from now, you're going to understand Bitcoin, and well enough that you could actually explain it to a friend. And no, you don't need to understand all the technical details, just like you don't need to be a software programmer to use a spreadsheet or an auto mechanic to drive a car. I'm going to break things down step by step in simple terms, what Bitcoin is, how it works, the problem it's designed to solve, and who might want to use it. And after the same 11 minutes, you are also going to be able to explain to your friends why they're spending $7 for a cheeseburger and why the price of housing always goes up. Now, you may have already heard a lot about Bitcoin. You might have heard that it's a scam, or you might have heard that it uses a lot of energy, or that it's used by criminals, or maybe something about a blockchain, or that it's decentralized. You might have also heard about 1,000 other cryptocurrencies and then wondered why Bitcoin's price keeps going up and down and up and down. Well, some of those topics are really important, and we're going to be discussing them in later videos. But when you're first understanding Bitcoin, what you really have to start with is the fact that Bitcoin is a system. Bitcoin is a system for money, and it is the only viable alternative to our current money system, the US dollar system. So first of all, I want you to think about why it is that we use money in the first place. If we didn't have money, trading goods and services would be super awkward and super time consuming, and you'd have to keep track of who owed whom what, or you'd have to trade dissimilar items. But with money, it allows you to trade quickly, simply, smoothly. And this is usually where people's understanding of money stops. They usually think about it as a thing that sits in the middle that you trade for other things. But money is also a system. For instance, if we look at the US dollar system, it's a piece of paper, but it's also a system, and it has something to do with your bank, the central bank, the Federal Reserve, the government, and taxes. And this money system manages two things. It manages who has what money, and it manages the total amount of money in the system. You can think of the system as a spreadsheet. In a lot of ways, it really is a spreadsheet. So let's look at the US dollar system spreadsheet. This is the number that everyone focuses on, the number of dollars in your bank account. But there's another number that's just as important, and that is the total amount of money in the system. And the reason that's important is that your purchasing power is a function of the amount of dollars that you have divided by the total amount of money in the system. So that's a little bit confusing. Why is that? The reason is that all of the money can buy all of the stuff that is for sale. And that's true regardless of how much money there is in the system. And so the prices of that stuff adjust to the amount of money in the system. It may help if you imagine that all of this is on an island. So if you have your money on the island, it's going to purchase all the stuff that's for sale on that island. And if you increase the money supply by 10 times, it's still going to buy all the same stuff. And if you think about it, we're on an island, just a bigger island. And what this means is that the prices that you have to pay for different items are a function both of the amount of money in your bank account as well as the total amount of money in the system. If you've got $100 and the total supply of money is $1,000, then you've got 10% of the purchasing power in that system. You can buy 10% of the stuff that's for sale. But if the money supply increases by 10 times, your purchasing power goes down. You might be wondering right about now, wait a second, how many dollars are there exactly in the US dollar system? Because it changes the value of your money. There's about $22 trillion in the US dollar system. And what this means is that $100 can purchase about 1 gram of gold. Has the US dollar supply always been 22 trillion? And has $100 always been able to buy about 1 gram of gold? Well, no. The US prints about 7% more dollars each and every year on average, which means that since 1960, this has increased the money supply, the amount of total money in the system, by about 75 times. In 1960, there was about $286 billion in the US dollar system. And what this meant is that your $100 could purchase about 88 grams of gold, 88 times as much gold for the same $100. You see, when the dollars in the system is going up, your purchasing power shrinks. This is why you see prices rising. This is why when you go to McDonald's, you're going to spend 12 times as much for the same Big Mac as you did in 1968. This is why you're going to spend 10 times as much for the same can of Campbell's soup. And this is not because we've gotten worse at making soup. It's not because we've gotten worse at making burgers. Technology has made it so much easier and so much faster to produce almost everything. And unfortunately, it's not just soup and burgers. The price of almost everything since 1960 has increased by a factor of about 10. But wait a second, hasn't the number of dollars in our bank accounts gone up too? Yes, but not as much as you might think. Average hourly earnings has gone up, but it's only gone up by about a factor of 6. And what this means in practice is that the average hour of work can purchase less Big Macs and less soup and less of our other daily goods than it could years back. So what exactly is going on here? I mean, who manages this system? Your bank keeps a record of your dollars, and your friend's bank keeps a record of his dollars, and the central bank sort of keeps the master spreadsheet. The Federal Reserve has what's called an open market committee and a board of directors. The board of directors has a chair, and when the chairperson, as well as the open market committee, all decide that they want to increase the dollars in the system, they double-click the spreadsheet. And surprisingly, that is just about all there is to it. They call it anything but double-clicking, anything but printing money, anything but increasing the dollars in the system. But practically speaking, the result is the same. You see, with the US dollar system, it runs on politics. The politicians are the ones that have to limit printing. And you can sort of guess how that goes. And as the number of dollars goes up, the value of the dollar goes down. Since 1935, the value of the dollar has gone down by about 95%, which means you've got about 5 cents of value left out of a 1935 dollar. Wait a second. If the US is not responsible, then surely there are countries that are responsible with their currencies. Every country prints money, and most countries print a lot more money than the United States does. Compared to the US dollar, which is already down 95%, a lot of other currencies are down a whole lot more, sometimes 90, 95, 99%, in addition to the 95% that the US dollar is down. And that's true of emerging market currencies, but it's also true of some of the larger, more established currencies, like the Great British Pound, like the Euro, like the Canadian dollar. So do we have any other options? Well, thankfully, yes. We have Bitcoin. But what exactly is Bitcoin? I mean, in really clear, tangible terms. Bitcoin is a system for money, and it's a system for money that runs on software. And the software functions more or less like a spreadsheet. In a lot of ways, it is a spreadsheet. The software keeps track of my Bitcoin, and it keeps track of your Bitcoin. And crucially, it limits the total amount of Bitcoin in the system to 21 million Bitcoins. The Bitcoin software runs on computers, and then those computers connect together to form a network. And then all of the data that's in the software replicates across that network so that all of the computers have all the same data. And it's not just 2 or 3 or 4 computers running Bitcoin. There's actually tens of thousands of computers around the world that are running Bitcoin, and they're each keeping an exact copy of every single Bitcoin transaction that's ever taken place, along with each person's Bitcoin balance. And the extraordinary thing is that there's no central government that controls Bitcoin. There's no organization that controls Bitcoin. There's no one individual that controls Bitcoin. You don't have to have permission from anyone to use Bitcoin. In fact, Bitcoin is the only monetary system that's available for anyone in the world to use, regardless of their race or their nationality or their gender or their wealth. So it's doing the same job as the US dollar system. It's keeping track of who owns what, and it's keeping track of the total amount of dollars in the system. And it's doing this without banks, without a central bank, and without politics. It's doing all of this with software and a network. So let's take a look at how Bitcoin manages who owns what. The ownership of Bitcoin is managed by private keys, and these keys are extraordinarily secure. In fact, if you had all the computers in the world running simultaneously in order to crack one Bitcoin key, it would take them basically forever. But if you've got the key, then you can log in and you can send or spend your Bitcoin. When those numbers change, it then replicates across the network until every single Bitcoin computer has the same data. But what about that limit? How exactly does Bitcoin enforce the 21 million Bitcoin limit? Because, usually with software, the limits are sort of soft. Maybe not everyone can change them, but if you're a programmer or if you're an administrator, then you have the ability to change the numbers. So why can't you change that number with Bitcoin? We're going to dive in, but first let me just point out that this is not necessarily a controversial point. Most people who've done any research at all realize that yes, actually, there is a hard cap on the total amount of Bitcoin. But why is that? I mean, why can't you have an administrator who has the proper credentials just log in and double click the number in order to change it from 21 to 22 million Bitcoin? Here's what would happen. They actually could change the number on their computer, their instance of the Bitcoin software. But as soon as they connected that to other Bitcoin computers on the Bitcoin network, they would get banned from the network. Because Bitcoin is not just one computer running one software program, it's tens of thousands of computers running that software program. And they've each agreed to play by the rules. And if you don't play by the rules, then you don't get to be part of the network. This may disappoint some people, but it's just the way things are. There's only 21 million Bitcoin, and that is all the Bitcoin that will ever be. And because Bitcoin is useful as a money system, and because it's limited to 21 million, the value of Bitcoin is going up. It's not been a smooth line, but the direction is pretty clear by now. And this, of course, is in direct contrast to the value of the US dollar. Because there's no real limit to the amount of dollars in circulation, and that number continues to go up, the value of each dollar continues to go down. So for the first time in a long time, people actually have a choice between two different money systems. The existing system, the US dollar system, that runs on politics and doesn't really have a practical limit to the amount of dollars that are in circulation, and the Bitcoin system, which runs on software and a computer network and limits the total amount of Bitcoin in circulation to 21 million. So at the most basic level, that is what Bitcoin is. It is a money system that is running on software that does not depend on a government, it doesn't depend on an organization, and it doesn't depend on any one individual, which means anyone, anywhere in the world can use the Bitcoin network without permission. So now you understand Bitcoin, and you could explain it to the next person. And even though there's lots of additional details, lots of additional facts about Bitcoin, everything stems from this one basic fact, that Bitcoin is not just a new kind of money, it's a new kind of money system.